In Guardian of Willow Creek, Emma Carter, a resilient single mother, moves to the quiet town of Willow Creek with her daughter Lila, hoping to rebuild their lives. Their newfound peace shatters when they discover the dark truth about the Eclipse Order, a secretive group exploiting vulnerable children for sinister rituals. With the help of allies, including the loyal German shepherd Atlas, Emma uncovers the Order's secret and rescues its captives. Along the way, the group faces harrowing challenges, sacrifices, and hard-fought victories. Directive statement. As the sanctuary collapses, Emma and her team believe they've dealt a significant blow to the Order, but Victor Hale, its sinister leader, leaves behind a chilling promise. This isn't over. Through courage, sacrifice, and unity, Emma and the town of Willow Creek emerge stronger, vowing to protect their community against future threats. What did you think of Guardian of Willow Creek? Where are you watching from? Comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, DG Stories, for more thrilling tales of courage, mystery, and inspiration. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling. This story combines suspense, emotional depth, and action, showcasing the power of resilience and unity. It reminds us that even in the face of darkness, loyalty and courage can bring hope. Would you like to see a sequel exploring Victor Hale's return? Let us know. It was a dreary November evening when Emma Carter and her daughter Lila drove into the town of Willow Creek. The small town, tucked deep in the misty Pacific Northwest, felt like a world away from the chaos they had left behind in Seattle. The rain poured heavily, blurring the windshield as Emma squinted at the faded wooden sign welcoming them to their new home. The move wasn't just a chance for a fresh start, it was an escape. For Emma, the past year had been a whirlwind of heartbreak and upheaval. After losing her husband in a tragic car accident and facing increasing pressure at her job as an animal behaviorist, she decided to pack up their lives and head to the quiet isolation of Willow Creek. Their new home was a modest two-story house on the edge of the forest. The property came with an overgrown garden and a rustic charm that felt both inviting and eerie. As they unloaded their belongings, the distant howl of the wind mingled with the sound of creaking branches, making Lila shiver. "Mom, it's creepy here," Lila whispered, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. "It's not creepy," Emma replied with forced cheerfulness. "It's peaceful, and we're going to love it here." But even Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them. That evening, after tucking Lila into bed, Emma brewed herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The rain continued to hammer against the glass, and the light from the single lamp in the living room cast long shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the forest caught her eye. It was faint, a flash of tan and black fur against the green backdrop. At first, she thought it might be a deer, but as it emerged from the shadows, she realized it was a dog. The animal limped toward her yard, its fur matted with mud and rain. Emma set her cup down and grabbed her coat. Stepping into the storm, she approached the dog cautiously. "Hey there, buddy," she called softly, crouching down. The dog stopped, its amber eyes locking onto hers. Despite its size and the wear of its fur, there was something noble about the way it held itself, even in pain. As Emma moved closer, she noticed the collar around its neck. The name Atlas was engraved on a worn tag. "Oh, you're hurt," Emma murmured. "Let me help you." Atlas didn't resist as she carefully examined his leg, noting the deep gash near his paw. He limped alongside her as she guided him to the house, where she cleaned and bandaged the wound. By morning, Lila had discovered Atlas curled up in the kitchen, her wide eyes lit up with excitement. "Is he ours now?" she asked, kneeling beside the dog. Emma smiled. "He's not ours, sweetie. He belongs to someone, but he needs help right now." Atlas seemed to take to Lila immediately, nudging her hand with his nose and wagging his tail faintly. Over the next few days, he followed her everywhere, standing protectively by her side. And despite Emma's efforts to locate Atlas's owner, no one in town seemed to know anything about him. When she asked her neighbor, an elderly man named Joe, he simply shook his head. "Strays come and go in these parts," he said, "but I'd keep an eye on him. Dogs like that, they've got stories to tell." Willow Creek had its own share of secrets. Emma quickly learned that the town had been struggling with a dark history of missing persons. Over the past decade, numerous people, mostly children, had vanished without a trace. At the local diner, Emma overheard snippets of conversation about the Order, a group that supposedly operated in the shadows, preying on the vulnerable. "Just urban legends," the waitress said when Emma asked about it. But the way the woman avoided eye contact made Emma uneasy. That night, as Emma went through some old files from work, she noticed Atlas sitting by the window, his ears perked up. He let out a low growl. Louis Go had daily events of whatever sort he chose to call personal importance. "What is it?" Emma whispered, walking over to him. She looked outside, but saw nothing but the swaying trees. Atlas, however, didn't relax. His growl turned into a bark, loud and commanding. It sent shivers down Emma's spine. The next day, while walking Atlas near the edge of the forest, Leela stopped abruptly. "Mom, look!" There was something that flashed before her eyes. There was a figure, moving. Emma followed her daughter's gaze to a tree trunk etched with a strange symbol, a crescent moon with an eclipse shadowing it. The carving looked old, the edges weathered, but still sharp enough to be recognizable. "What do you think it means?" Lila asked. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "I don't know," she said, pulling Lila close. Atlas growled low in his throat, his hackles rising as he stared into the dense forest. Emma had the distinct feeling that they weren't alone. As they hurried back home, Emma couldn't shake the thought that the symbol was a warning, and that the dog who appeared in their lives wasn't just a coincidence. Now that Martin had taken Sam to a better place, and that his explanation of the evening symptoms was hard to comprehend, that evening, as the rain poured relentlessly, Emma sat at her kitchen table, flipping through the notebook where she had scribbled observations about Atlas. The dog was unlike any she had encountered before, intelligent, vigilant, and almost eerily attuned to their surroundings. She looked up to see Atlas lying near the door, his ears perked and eyes watching her intently, as if sensing her unease. "Do you know something I don't?" she muttered. Before she could dwell on it further, Lila ran into the room, holding a piece of paper she had drawn on. "Look, Mom, I drew Atlas as a superhero." Emma smiled, taking the paper. The crude crayon drawing showed Atlas standing tall, a cape flapping behind him, and the crescent moon symbol shining above. "Where did you see this symbol?" Emma asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "In the forest, remember? The tree had it," Lila replied, fidgeting with her bunny. Emma's stomach tightened. The symbol had stuck with her, but hearing Lila mention it again filled her with unease. She decided to do some research later that night. At around midnight, Emma woke to Atlas barking furiously. His deep, resonant growl filled the house as he stood at the front door, scratching and pacing. Emma's heart pounded as she grabbed a flashlight and peered through the peephole. "Nothing." "Stay here, Leela," she said, hearing her daughter stir in her room. She slowly opened the door, the cold rain slapping against her face. The porch was empty, but something felt off. Atlas bolted past her into the yard, his barks echoing into the darkness. Scotty's search for the car proved to be open. Atlas had left his mischiefs. "At least come back." The dog stopped near the edge of the forest, his body rigid and hackles raised. Emma squinted into the trees, her flashlight catching glimpses of swaying branches. She swore she saw a shadow move, a figure, fleeting but unmistakable. Racing back inside, she locked the door and double-checked the windows. Atlas returned moments later, his muddy paws leaving streaks on the hardwood floor. He sat by Lila's door, standing guard, and Emma knew this was no random stray dog. The next morning, Emma called the local sheriff, John Kavanaugh, to report the incident. A grizzled man with years of experience, he listened patiently, but didn't seem particularly alarmed. The next morning, Emma boarded the 150-mile train ride to Bavaria and was transported to the hospital. "Probably just some drifter," he said, sipping his coffee. "We've had a few of those since the mill shut down." "It didn't feel random," Emma insisted. "There's something else going on here." Kavanaugh raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "If you see anything else, call me." Returning home, Emma decided to investigate on her own. She searched the symbol online but found little more than cryptic forums about cults and local legends. What stuck out, however, was a connection to Willow Creek's gold rush history. The crescent moon and eclipse were tied to a group that called themselves the Eclipse Order, who supposedly used the mines for illegal activities a century ago. She closed her laptop, her hands trembling. It felt too coincidental to ignore. As the days passed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she and Lila were being watched. Atlas's behavior grew increasingly alert. He refused to leave Lila's side, even growling at shadows that Emma couldn't see. One late afternoon, Emma decided to take Lila and Atlas for a walk to clear her mind. They headed toward the forest's edge, where the air smelled of damp earth and pine. Lila skipped ahead, humming to herself, while Atlas stayed close to Emma, his nose constantly sniffing the air. "Stay where I can see you," Emma called to Lila, who had wandered a bit too far. "Yes, Mom," Lila shouted back, but just as she did, she froze. Emma's heart sank as she hurried to her daughter. Lila was staring at the ground, where a cluster of freshly disturbed dirt formed a mound. "What is it?" Emma asked, her voice hushed. Lila pointed, and Emma saw particularly a small broken pendant lying on the soil. It bore the same crescent moon and eclipse symbol they had seen on the tree. The sight sent chills through her. "Let's go," Emma said, scooping up the pendant. As they turned to leave, Atlas let out a fierce bark and bolted into the woods. "Atlas!" Emma shouted, but the dog had already disappeared into the thick underbrush. Emma and Lila waited anxiously at the edge of the forest. After what felt like an eternity, Atlas returned, his coat bristling and his mouth clamped around something. A piece of torn fabric. "I believe it's paper." Emma crouched to examine it, her stomach twisting. The fabric was dark and stained, as if it had been buried or left in the elements for a long time. "We're going home," she said firmly, taking Lila's hand. That night, Emma found herself pacing the living room while Lila slept. She couldn't stop thinking about the pendant and the fabric. Her instincts screamed that the two were connected. End of Chapter 8. Suddenly, a loud crash broke the silence. Emma rushed to the front door, finding it ajar. The lock had been forced open, and muddy footprints led into the house. "Lila!" she screamed, running to her daughter's room. She flung the door open to find Lila sitting up in bed, wide-eyed but unharmed. Atlas stood at the foot of the bed, his teeth bared, and a low growl rumbling from his throat. "What's going on?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. Emma's eyes darted around the room, her heart racing. She noticed a figure retreating into the shadows outside the window. A man, tall and dressed in dark clothing. He was gone before she could react. The next day, Emma returned to Sheriff Kavanaugh, this time with the torn fabric and pendant. "These aren't coincidences," she insisted. "Someone broke into my house last night." Kavanaugh frowned, examining the items. "This symbol. I've seen it before. It's tied to some local legends, but nothing concrete." "What kind of legends?" Kavanaugh hesitated. "There's talk about a group called the Eclipse Order. Supposedly they've been operating here for decades, using the forest and mines for their activities. People say they're involved in dark things. And Emma felt a chill run down her spine. And you don't think they're real? Real or not, something's going on, he admitted. But we don't have evidence, just stories. I'll look into it, but keep your doors locked and your dog close. The following night, Emma couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house felt like a warning, every shadow a potential threat. She kept the pendant and fabric on the kitchen table, her laptop open to articles and forums discussing the Eclipse Order. The stories painted a chilling picture, a group shrouded in secrecy, rumored to abduct children for unknown purposes. Atlas lay at her feet, his ears twitching at every sound. He hadn't left her side all evening, and his presence was the only thing keeping her calm. At around midnight, a noise broke through the stillness, a faint tapping at the living room window. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Atlas was on his feet in an instant, his growl low and threatening. Emma grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the window, her heart pounding. Peering through the glass, she saw nothing but darkness.
How is he doing?
Emma tingled. How could this be? And then she was... "Stay here," she whispered to Atlas, though she knew he wouldn't. Opening the door cautiously, Emma stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting at her skin. The night was silent, except for the soft rustle of leaves. Exercise. Then she saw it. On the porch railing was another pendant, identical to the one they had found in the woods, but this one was clean and polished, as if placed there deliberately. Emma's pulse quickened as she scanned the darkness, knowing someone was out there watching. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. There was no response, but a rustling sound from the trees made her step back inside, locking the door behind her. The next morning, Emma woke to find muddy footprints leading up to the house again. Whoever had been there the night before had returned, but this time they had left a note on the front door. The words were scrawled in sharp, jagged letters. "Stay out of the forest. This is your only warning." Emma's hand shook as she tore the note down. She couldn't let fear control her. But the threat was real, and it was getting closer to home. She decided to confide in someone who might understand. Clara Jensen, the town librarian, had always seemed to know more about Willow Creek's history than she let on. That afternoon, Emma visited the library, bringing the pendants and the torn fabric with her. Clara's face paled as Emma laid the items on the table. "Where did you find these?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the forest," Emma replied. "And on my porch." Clara leaned in, her expression grim. "This symbol, it's not just a story. The Eclipse Order is real. They've been here for generations, hiding in plain sight. Whatever you've stumbled onto, they won't let it go." Clara explained that the Order had deep ties to Willow Creek's past. During the gold rush, they had used the town as a front for their illegal activities, and even after the mines dried up, their influence lingered. Over the years, they evolved, becoming a shadowy force that preyed on the vulnerable. "They've been quiet for a while," Clara said, "but if they're active again, you and your daughter are in danger." Clara said to Emma. Emma's mind raced. "What do they want with us?" Clara shook her head. "It's not you, Emma. It's her." Emma's blood ran cold. "They target children with specific traits. Empathy, resilience, qualities that make them special." Clara continued. "Your daughter may have caught their attention. Your children may have caught themselves looking at their daughter when she was young and suspected it would one day be of use to them." At that moment, Emma realized the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. The danger wasn't just looming, it was here. Returning home, Emma found Atlas pacing near Lila's room. his sharp eyes never leaving the window. She knelt beside him, stroking his fur for comfort as much as reassurance. He smelled not pain, more determined grief. "We'll protect her," Emma whispered, her voice steady despite her fear. "Whatever it takes." Atlas let out a low growl, his head snapping toward the window. Emma followed his gaze, catching a fleeting shadow disappearing into the woods. Her jaw dropped. The fight had just begun. Emma spent the next morning poring over the materials Clara had provided. The documents, a mix of Old Town records and personal notes, painted a chilling portrait of the Eclipse Order. They were more than just a group. They were an institution, deeply embedded in Willow Creek's history. The Order's origins traced back to the gold rush, when a secretive circle of prospectors formed a pact to protect their claims at all costs. Over the decades, their focus shifted from wealth to power, exploiting the vulnerable and erasing anyone who stood in their way. Emma's hands trembled as she read a handwritten note Clara had added. They seek what they call guardians, children who show empathy, courage, and loyalty. They believe these traits hold the key to unlocking something greater. What? I don't know. But the disappearances always start with those kids. Her thoughts immediately turned to Lila. That evening, Emma met with Jack Monroe, the retired sheriff who had lost his niece to a disappearance 10 years earlier. Jack was a gruff man, his weathered face etched with years of guilt and frustration. "I know what you're dealing with," Jack said, after Emma explained everything. "The Order has been untouchable for as long as I can remember. I tried to fight them back when I was sheriff, but they always covered their tracks. This time, why haven't you gone public?" Emma demanded. Jack gave a bitter laugh. "Who would believe me? The Order's got their hands in everything, police, courts, even the media. They made sure I'd never find evidence." Emma's frustration boiled over. "So what do we do? Just let them take more kids?" Jack's expression softened. "No, not this time. You've got something I never did, a chance to stop them. That dog of yours, Atlas, he's not ordinary. If he's leading you, it's for a reason." Jack shared a lead he had kept to himself for years. The Redwood Mines, abandoned for decades but rumored to be a hidden base for the Order's activities. "I never had enough manpower to go in," Jack admitted. "But with Atlas and the right plan, we might stand a chance." Emma hesitated. "What about Leela? I can't leave her unprotected." "We'll bring her to Clara," Jack suggested. "She'll be safe there." That night, Emma explained the situation to Lila. The little girl listened quietly, clutching Atlas's fur for comfort. "Will you come back?" Lila asked, her wide eyes brimming with fear. Emma knelt beside her. "I promise, sweetheart. Atlas will make sure we do." The next morning, Emma and Jack set out for the mines, with Atlas leading the way. The dense forest grew darker as they approached, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Jack carried a flashlight and a revolver, his grip steady despite his age. Emma followed closely, clutching a map Jack had marked with potential entry points. Atlas stayed ahead, his posture tense and alert. As they reached the mine's entrance, an eerie silence fell over the woods. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "This is it," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. Atlas growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. "We don't go in blind," Jack cautioned. "If something happens, we fall back immediately." But Emma knew there was no turning back. The safety of her daughter and every other child in Willow Creek depended on what they found inside.
Hard to do this.
The entrance to the Redwood Mines was a gaping maw of darkness, framed by crumbling wooden beams that seemed ready to collapse at any moment. Emma hesitated, clutching the flashlight tighter in her hand. "Stay close," Jack said, stepping in first. Atlas followed without hesitation, his body low and movements deliberate, like a predator stalking prey. Emma swallowed her fear and entered the mine. The air inside was damp and stale, carrying a metallic tang that clung to the back of her throat. The beam of her flashlight danced across jagged walls, revealing rusted tools and broken tracks from the mine's long-abandoned rail system. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in years," Emma whispered. Jack shook his head. "That's what they want you to think. Places like this are perfect for staying hidden." As they ventured deeper, Atlas stopped abruptly, his ears twitching. He let out a low growl, staring at something further down the tunnel. Emma pointed her flashlight in the same direction and froze. On the wall, barely visible beneath layers of grime, was the crescent moon and eclipse symbol, freshly painted in black. "This isn't abandoned," she whispered. Jack examined the symbol, his jaw tightening. "They're marking their territory." Atlas sniffed the ground near the wall, then turned and began walking purposefully down another passage. Jack and Emma exchanged a glance before following. The tunnel twisted and turned, growing narrower and colder. Emma shivered, but Atlas pressed on, his focus unwavering. They soon came to a fork, and without hesitation, Atlas chose the left path. "Looks like he knows where he's going," Jack muttered, gripping his revolver. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a large open chamber deep within the mine. Emma gasped at the sight. The room was illuminated by dim, flickering lanterns, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the chamber stood a makeshift altar, surrounded by strange artifacts and symbols carved into the stone. Chains and cuffs were bolted to the walls, and the floor was littered with scraps of clothing and belongings. "This isn't just a hideout," Emma said, her voice shaking. "This is a prison." Jack's face darkened. "And a ritual site. They've been using this place for decades." Atlas sniffed around the chamber, his movements urgent. He stopped at a pile of debris and began pawing at it. Emma hurried over, helping him uncover a small, leather-bound book. "What is this?" she asked, brushing the dirt off the cover. Jack leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Looks like a journal. Maybe it belonged to someone they took." Emma opened the book, her hands trembling. The pages were filled with frantic scrawled notes, accounts of someone who had been held captive in the mines. The final entry read, "Surprise, surprise. They want the children, the ones who feel deeply, who see beyond. They think they'll find answers in their suffering." Emma's blood ran cold. Before she could process the words, a noise echoed through the chamber. A faint shuffle, followed by a metallic clink. "Someone's here," Jack hissed, raising his revolver. The shadows shifted as figures emerged from the far side of the room, their faces obscured by black masks. There were 3 of them, each armed with batons and knives. "Run!" Jack barked, firing a warning shot that ricocheted off the stone wall. Emma grabbed the journal and bolted for the tunnel, Atlas by her side. Jack followed, covering their escape with another shot, clinging desperately to his dead friend's hand and needle. The masked figures gave chase, their footsteps pounding behind them. The narrow tunnel amplified the sounds, making it impossible to tell how close they were. "Faster!" Jack shouted, his voice echoing. The 3 of them burst out of the mine's entrance, gasping for air. Emma glanced back just in time to see the masked men halt at the mouth of the tunnel. They didn't pursue further, but one of them raised a hand in a slow, deliberate gesture. A warning. Back at the house, Emma paced the living room, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. Jack sat nearby, reloading his revolver, while Atlas lay at Lila's feet, his eyes still locked on the door. "We can't do this alone," Emma said finally. "If the Order is this organized, we need help." "So why is this organized?" Emma asked. Jack nodded grimly. "I know a few people who might be willing to fight back, but it won't be easy convincing them." "Then we don't have a choice," Emma replied. "We fight, or they'll keep coming." The next day, Jack made calls to a handful of people he trusted, old friends, former colleagues, and locals who had been hurt by the Eclipse Order's influence. By the evening, a small group had gathered at Emma's house. Clara Jensen, the librarian who brought detailed maps of the mine and records she had uncovered over the years. Eli Turner, a skilled carpenter who had lost his younger brother to a disappearance 15 years ago. Eli had thought he might be losing his brother. Maria Lopez, a retired paramedic who had treated many of the Order's victims and knew the forest like the back of her hand. Emma stood at the center of the room, feeling both overwhelmed and determined. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know this isn't easy, but the Order is real and they're still operating right under our noses." She laid the journal on the table, flipping to the final entry. "This confirms what we feared. They're targeting children, and they're using the mines as a base." Eli clenched his fists. "So we go in and shut them down. What are we waiting for?" "It's not that simple," Jack interjected. "They're armed, organized, and dangerous. We need a plan." Clara spread out her map, pointing to the tunnels they had explored. "The main chamber is here," she said. "But these records suggest there's another entrance, hidden near the northern ridge. If we can get in through there, we might be able to catch them off guard." Maria nodded. "I'll bring medical supplies. If they've got captives, we'll need to act fast." Eli tapped the map. "And if they catch us?" Jack's jaw tightened. "We make sure they don't. Atlas will help lead us, but we stick together, no matter what." Atlas raised a hand to his lips. In training, the group spent the next day gathering supplies and strategizing. Emma stocked flashlights, rope, and food, while Jack prepared weapons. Maria packed a medical kit, and Clara reviewed the journal for any additional clues. Atlas remained restless, pacing the house as if sensing the danger ahead. Lila noticed his behavior and clung to Emma's side. "Mom, do you have to go?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. Emma knelt beside her. "I do, sweetheart. But you'll stay with Clara, and Atlas will protect us. I promise we'll come back." Lila hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Be safe." As the group prepared to leave, a chilling discovery stopped them in their tracks. A fresh note was nailed to Emma's front door. "Kind, caring. Turn back or you'll regret it." The handwriting was the same jagged style as the previous warning. Eli ripped it down, his face hard with anger. "They're trying to scare us." "It means they know we're coming," Clara said. "We'll need to move quickly." Jack looked at Emma. "Are you ready for this?" She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "More than ever." By nightfall, the group reached the northern ridge, where the secondary entrance to the mine was hidden. The journey was treacherous, the rocky terrain slick from rain. Atlas led the way, his nose low to the ground as he sniffed out the path. "Here," Clara whispered, pointing to an overgrown thicket. Behind it was a narrow opening just large enough for a person to squeeze through. Jack inspected the entrance, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "This is it. Everyone stay close and quiet." The group entered the tunnel one by one, the air growing colder with every step. The walls were lined with rotting wood beams, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed around them. Atlas's ears perked up, and he growled softly. Emma's stomach tightened. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. The dog moved forward, his movements deliberate. The tunnel opened into a smaller chamber, where they found another unsettling sight. A pile of discarded belongings. Clothes, shoes, and toys. Eli's face twisted in anger. These belonged to the kids they took. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll bring them back. All of them." The group pressed on, but as they turned a corner, Clara froze. "Wait," she hissed, pointing to the ground. Emma shone her flashlight down, revealing a series of tripwires strung across the path. "It's a trap." Clara muttered. "It's costing us much more than we have." Jack carefully disarmed the wires, his hands steady despite the tension. "They know we're here," he said grimly. "We need to move faster." Emma's heart pounded as they continued deeper into the mine. Every step felt like a gamble, the oppressive darkness pressing down on them. Atlas suddenly stopped, his growl turning into a bark. From the shadows ahead, a figure emerged, and the group raised their flashlights to reveal a masked man blocking their path. The masked man stood motionless, his presence sending a wave of tension through the group. Jack raised his revolver, aiming squarely at the figure's chest. "Move aside," Jack commanded, his voice firm. The man didn't speak. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, a silent challenge. From the darkness behind him, more masked figures appeared. 3, then 5, their forms blending into the shadows of the mine. "They were waiting for us," Clara whispered, clutching the map tightly. "Fall back," Jack muttered. Slowly, the group began to retreat, their footsteps careful and deliberate. But as they turned the corner, the path behind them filled with more masked men, cutting off their escape. "We're surrounded," Maria said, her voice steady but tense. Atlas growled fiercely, his body low to the ground, ready to defend. The first masked man lunged forward, swinging a baton. Jack fired his revolver, the shot echoing through the tunnel, and the man crumpled to the ground. "Dismissal." "Stay close," Jack shouted, as chaos erupted. Eli swung a makeshift club he had brought, connecting with another attacker. Clara ducked behind a pile of rubble, using a flashlight to blind one of the men coming toward her. Maria grabbed a sharp piece of broken metal and slashed at an assailant, driving them back. Emma found herself face to face with one of the masked figures. Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she swung her flashlight like a weapon, striking the man's hand and causing him to drop his knife. Atlas leapt into action, his teeth sinking into the arm of an attacker lunging at Emma. The man screamed, trying to shake the dog off, but Atlas held firm until the attacker collapsed to the ground. "Atlas, come," Emma called, her voice trembling but strong. The dog returned to her side, blood dripping from his muzzle, but his eyes fierce. The fight lasted only minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When it was over, the masked men retreated into the deeper tunnels, leaving the group battered but alive. "Is everyone okay?" Jack asked, breathing heavily as he reloaded his revolver. "I'm fine," Maria said, though a cut on her arm suggested otherwise. Clara emerged from her hiding spot, shaken but unhurt. Eli checked his bruised shoulder, muttering a curse under his breath. Emma knelt beside Atlas, running her hands over his fur. "You're hurt," she said softly, noticing a gash on his side. Atlas nudged her hand, as if to reassure her that he was fine. "They'll be back," Jack said grimly. "We need to move before they regroup." The group pressed on, their movements quicker and more deliberate. Atlas continued to lead, his injured body moving with determination. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to move single file. Emma's flashlight illuminated more markings on the walls, symbols and sigils that sent chills down her spine. "What do these mean?" she asked Clara, who examined them closely. "They're warnings," Clara said, "or instructions. Either way, they're meant for the Order, not us." "Then we're definitely in the right place," Eli muttered. At last they reached another chamber, this one smaller but no less disturbing. Chains hung from the walls, and in the corner, a pile of dirty mattresses suggested this was where captives had been held. Emma's stomach turned as she spotted something on the ground. A small stuffed bear, its fur matted and torn. She picked it up, her hands shaking. "It belonged to one of the kids," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her car was missing." Maria knelt beside her. "We'll get them back," she said firmly, "but we need to stay focused." Atlas suddenly barked, his eyes fixed on a door at the far end of the chamber. It was made of reinforced metal, its surface scratched and dented. "That's where they're keeping them," Jack said, his tone grim. "How do we get through?" Eli asked, examining the heavy lock. Clara produced a crowbar from her bag. "We break it open." As Jack and Eli worked on the door, Clara and Maria kept watch. Emma stood with Atlas, her heart racing. The further they ventured, the more she felt the weight of what they were up against. The door finally gave way with a groan, revealing a narrow corridor lined with cells. The stench of damp and decay was overwhelming. "Spread out," Jack instructed. "Look for survivors." Emma moved cautiously, her flashlight revealing empty cells and broken chains. At the end of the corridor, she found a young boy, no older than 10, huddled in the corner of one of the cells. His eyes were wide with fear, his face pale and gaunt. "Hey," Emma said gently, kneeling down. "It's okay. We're here to help." The boy flinched at first, but then hesitantly reached out to her. Are they gone?" he whispered. "They're not going to hurt you anymore," Emma promised, her voice firm. Emma replied numbly. As she helped the boy out of the cell, Atlas pressed close to her side, his presence calming the child. "This is only the beginning," Clara said from behind her. "If they've taken this many, how many more are there?" As the group carefully led the boy out of the corridor, Clara's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows on the damp walls. The boy clung to Emma, his small hands trembling. "What's your name?" Emma asked gently. "Caleb," the boy whispered, his voice hoarse. "Caleb, we're going to get you out of here," Emma reassured him. Atlas walked closely beside Caleb, his eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of danger. The group pressed forward, but as they reached the chamber's exit, they encountered another metal door, this one adorned with elaborate carvings of the crescent moon and eclipse. "This is different," Clara muttered, tracing the carvings with her fingers. "It's not just a door, it's a marker." "A marker for what?" Emma asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Clara stepped back, her face pale. "This isn't just a hideout. It's their sanctuary. Whatever they're doing here, it's bigger than we thought." Eli and Jack forced the door open, revealing a cavernous room bathed in an eerie red glow. At the center stood a massive stone altar, surrounded by symbols painted in blood. Candles flickered on every surface, their flames casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Emma's breath caught as she noticed a series of small, empty cages stacked in the corner. Nearby, a row of black robes hung neatly on a rack. "This is where they perform their rituals," Maria said, her voice shaking with disgust. Caleb's grip on Emma tightened. "They made us watch," he said, tears streaming down his face. "They said it was for the greater good." Emma knelt to his level, her heart breaking. "You're safe now," she said firmly. "They'll never hurt you again." Atlas suddenly barked, the sound echoing off the stone walls. Before anyone could react, the room flooded with figures in black robes, their faces obscured by masks. "Get behind me!" Jack shouted, raising his revolver. The robed figures moved in unison, forming a circle around the group. One of them stepped forward, removing his mask to reveal a familiar face. Victor Hale, the charismatic leader of the Eclipse Order. "Well, well," Victor said, his voice smooth and mocking. "I wasn't expecting guests, but here you are, stumbling into the heart of our operation." "Let the kid go," Jack growled, aiming his gun at Victor. Victor laughed coldly. "You think this is about one boy? You're standing in the middle of a legacy that's been cultivated for generations. You can't stop us." Emma stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "You're exploiting innocent children for your twisted rituals. It ends here." Victor's smile widened. "Ah, the moral outrage, so predictable. He gestured to the robed figures, who began to close in. Chaos erupted as the group fought to defend themselves. Jack fired his revolver, taking down one of the robed figures, while Eli swung his club with raw fury. Maria grabbed Caleb and shielded him, keeping him out of harm's way. Emma stood her ground, swinging a heavy flashlight at anyone who came near her. Atlas was a blur of motion, his powerful jaws and sharp instincts turning him into a force of nature. Victor watched the melee with detached amusement, stepping back toward the altar. "You're too late," he said calmly. "The ritual is already in motion." Emma's eyes darted to the altar, where a large ornate book lay open. Its pages were covered in strange symbols, pulsating with an otherworldly light. "We need to stop him," Clara shouted, pointing at the book. Emma lunged toward the altar, her heart pounding. Victor stepped in her way, grabbing her wrist. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," he hissed. "I understand enough," Emma shot back, yanking her arm free. She grabbed the book and hurled it into the nearest candle, setting its pages alight. Victor's calm demeanor shattered. "No!" he roared, reaching for the flames. But it was too late. The fire consumed the book, and the red glow in the room began to flicker. The robed figures faltered, their movements slowing as if an invisible force had been severed. Jack and Eli seized the opportunity to drive them back, while Atlas stood protectively in front of Maria and Caleb. The cavern began to shake, loose rocks falling from the ceiling. "We have to go!" Jack shouted. Emma grabbed Caleb, pulling him toward the exit. Clara and Maria followed closely, while Atlas herded the group like a seasoned protector. "Let's move on!" cried Edgar. Victor's voice echoed behind them, filled with rage. "This isn't over. You can't stop the order." But Emma didn't look back. The group emerged from the mine just as the entrance collapsed, sealing the sanctuary, and Victor Hale inside. Back at Emma's house, the group tended to their wounds in silence. Caleb sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, while Atlas rested at his feet, his chest rising and falling steadily despite his injuries. "This isn't over," Clara said, breaking the quiet. "The order is bigger than just Victor Hale. They'll regroup." Emma nodded, her gaze steady. "Then we'll be ready. We stopped them once, and we'll do it again if we have to." And Atlas let out a soft huff, as if in agreement. The group had barely caught their breath after escaping the collapsing mine when reality hit them. Their battle with the Eclipse Order was far from over. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Across from her, Clara spread out her notes and maps, her face etched with worry. "They won't stop," Clara said, tapping the edge of the journal they had retrieved from the mine. "Victor's alive, and he's not the kind of man to let this go." Eli leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "So what do? Wait for them to regroup and come after us again?" "No," Jack interrupted, his tone firm. "We take the fight to them." Maria, who had been tending to Caleb's wounds, joined the conversation. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice low. "There might be another way to weaken them." All eyes turned to her. "The Order's been using the forest for years," Maria explained. "But if they have another base, or resources, they'd need a way to move supplies and people without drawing attention. I used to work search and rescue in these woods. There's an old logging road that connects to the mines and leads deeper into the mountain. If they're hiding something else, it's out there." Clara nodded, flipping through her notes. "It makes sense. There were mentions of a secondary location in some of the older records. Something about a sanctuary." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "So the mine was just one part of it," she said. "And the sanctuary is the heart of their operation." Jack looked around the room. "Then that's where we go next. We find the sanctuary, and we finish this." The group spent the next day gathering supplies and preparing for what they knew would be the most dangerous part of their journey. Jack cleaned and loaded his revolver while Eli fashioned crude weapons from tools and scrap metal. Clara organized her maps and notes, ensuring they had a clear path to follow. Emma focused on Caleb, who had become increasingly quiet since their escape from the mine. Sitting beside him on the couch, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. When you go out into the world, you feel others' presence, someone that best they can do without any further speech. But you don't have to come with us, she said gently. Caleb shook his head. I want to help. They took everything from me. I don't want them to hurt anyone else. Emma's heart ached for the boy's courage. Then we'll stop them. Together. By nightfall, the group was ready. Atlas, now bandaged but still alert, led the way into the forest. The old logging road Maria had mentioned was overgrown and treacherous, but it provided a clear path toward the sanctuary's suspected location. The air grew colder as they climbed higher into the mountains, and the dense trees seemed to close in around them. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, set their nerves on edge. Do you think they know we're coming? Emma whispered to Jack. They probably assume we'll stay hidden, Jack replied. But we're not giving them that chance. Atlas suddenly stopped, his ears perked and his nose in the air. He let out a low growl, his body tense. What is it, boy? Emma asked, her hand instinctively going to her flashlight. A faint sound drifted through the trees, voices, muffled but distinct. The group froze, exchanging wary glances. Their clothes, Clara whispered. They pushed forward cautiously, the voices growing louder with each step. At last they reached a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a massive stone structure, partially hidden by the surrounding forest. It was ancient and imposing, with high walls and a single heavy door marked with the crescent moon and eclipse symbol. Looks like we found it, Eli muttered, his grip tightening on his weapon. The group crouched behind the tree line, surveying the area. Guards in black robes patrolled the perimeter, their faces obscured by masks. There's no way we're walking in through the front door, Maria said. Clara studied the map, pointing to a section marked ventilation. There might be another way in. Here. If we can access the vents, we could bypass the guards and get inside. Jack nodded. Let's move. Pravushka said to Bona. Let's move quickly before someone comes for us. The group circled the perimeter of the sanctuary, their steps light and deliberate as they searched for the ventilation shaft Clara had identified. The guards patrolled in pairs, their movements precise and rehearsed. Emma's heart pounded as she crouched low, Atlas close by her side. Over here, Clara whispered, pointing to a small grated opening partially hidden by vines. Eli knelt beside the vent, using a crowbar to pry it open as quietly as possible. The metal groaned softly, but the guards didn't seem to notice. One by one, the group crawled inside, the narrow space forcing them to move single file. The air inside the vent was stale, and the sound of their movements echoed faintly. Atlas led the way, his nose low to the ground, sniffing out the path ahead. Where does this lead? Emma whispered. It's the main chamber, if the map is right, Clara replied. After what felt like an eternity, the vent opened into a high shadowed chamber. The group emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking the room below, their breaths catching at the sight. The chamber was massive, lit by rows of torches and a large fire pit at its center. Dozens of robed figures stood in a circle, chanting in unison. At the far end of the room, Victor Hale stood on a raised platform, his arms outstretched as he addressed the group. This is the night we ascend, Victor declared, his voice resonating through the chamber. The children we have gathered are the key. Through their purity, we will achieve what our ancestors only dreamed of. Emma's stomach churned as she saw a row of cages lining the walls, each one holding a frightened child. Caleb gasped, his eyes wide with recognition. "They're here," he whispered. Emma clenched her fists. "We have to get them out of there." Jack surveyed the chamber, his eyes narrowing. "We can't fight all of them head on," he said. "We need to create a distraction." Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the fire pit. "If we can extinguish the fire, it'll disrupt the ritual and throw them into chaos." Clara nodded. Maria glanced at the cages. "While they're distracted, we free the kids." The results from the test were positive. Eli tightened his grip on his weapon. "And if Victor gets in the way?" "We stop him," Jack said grimly. "Whatever it takes." The group split into two teams. Jack, Clara, and Eli moved toward the fire pit, sticking to the shadows, while Emma, Maria, and Caleb focused on the cages. Atlas stayed close to Emma, his every movement deliberate and protective. Jack's team reached the fire pit first. Clara quickly located the mechanism controlling the ventilation system that fed air to the flames. With a few precise adjustments, she shut off the airflow, causing the fire to sputter and die. The sudden darkness threw the chamber into confusion. The robed figures broke from their chant, murmuring in alarm as the flames flickered out. "What's happening?" Victor bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. At that moment, Emma and Maria reached the cages. Maria worked quickly to pick the locks, her hands steady despite the urgency. Caleb helped guide the children out of the cages, whispering reassurances to calm their fears. "Hurry," Emma urged, her eyes darting toward the platform where Victor now stood, his gaze scanning the room. The sanctuary erupted into chaos as the robed figures scrambled to reignite the fire. Jack and Eli took advantage of the confusion, using their weapons to incapacitate several guards who ventured too close. But Victor quickly regained control. "Seal the exits," he shouted, his voice booming. "Do not let them escape." Several guards moved toward the chamber's doors, locking them shut. Emma's heart sank as she realized they were trapped. "We need another way out," she called to Clara, who was scanning the room desperately. "There." Clara pointed to a side passage partially hidden behind a tapestry. Emma turned to the children. "Follow me. Stay close to Atlas." The group made a break for the passage, with Atlas leading the way. But Victor spotted them, his eyes narrowing with fury. "Stop them!" he roared, descending from the platform. As the group reached the side passage, Victor and several guards gave chase. Emma pushed the children forward, urging them to keep moving, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. "Don't stop," she shouted, her voice firm despite the panic rising in her chest. Victor closed in, his powerful strides carrying him quickly across the chamber. "You can't save them," he sneered. "This is bigger than you." Emma turned to face him, her fists clenched. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady. "They're not yours to take." Atlas stepped forward, baring his teeth as a low growl rumbled in his throat. The dog's eyes were locked on Victor, his body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Victor stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he studied Atlas. "That dog won't save you," he sneered, stepping closer. "You don't understand the power at work here." Emma refused to back down, her fear giving way to determination. "The only power I see is the fear you use to control people. That ends now." Victor raised a hand, signaling the guards to move forward, but before they could act, Atlas lunged. His powerful jaws locked onto Victor's arm, forcing a scream from the man as he staggered backward. The guards hesitated, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack. "Run," Emma shouted to the others. Maria and Clara ushered the children through the passage, with Jack and Eli covering their retreat. Emma stayed behind, her focus on Atlas as he wrestled with Victor. Victor managed to throw Atlas off, blood dripping from his arm. He glared at Emma, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed, pulling a concealed blade from his belt. Atlas growled, his body low to the ground as he prepared to attack again. Emma grabbed a metal rod lying nearby, gripping it tightly as she stepped between Victor and the passage. "You'll have to get through me first," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The room." Victor laughed coldly. "So be it." He lunged at her, his blade flashing in the dim light. Emma swung the rod with all her strength, knocking the blade from his hand. Victor staggered but quickly recovered, his movements surprisingly agile for a man his age. Atlas charged again, this time aiming for Victor's legs. The impact sent Victor crashing to the ground, and Emma wasted no time, grabbing the blade and tossing it out of reach. "Emma!" Jack's voice echoed from the passage. "We need to go." Emma looked down at Victor, who was struggling to rise. For a moment she considered finishing him off, but Atlas barked sharply, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Let's go, boy," she said, backing toward the passage. Victor's furious voice followed them as they disappeared into the tunnel. "You think you've won? This isn't over," Brutus cried after them. "What?" The group raced through the passage, the children's frightened sobs echoing off the walls. Atlas stayed close to Emma, his ears perked for any signs of pursuit. "Where does this lead?" Maria asked, her voice tight with urgency. Clara consulted the map as they ran. "It connects to the ventilation system. If we keep going, we'll come out near the eastern ridge." Just as the group began to relax, a deafening roar shook the passage. The walls trembled and dust rained down from the ceiling. Humble looked into the fortress, which was coated with ultra-thin glass, and tried to concentrate. "What was that?" Eli shouted, his eyes wide with panic. Clara's face paled. "They're collapsing the tunnels. They're trying to trap us inside." "We have to move faster," Jack urged, pushing the group forward. The air grew thick with dust as the walls began to crack. Emma shielded Caleb with her body, her heart pounding as the tunnel threatened to give way. "This way," Clara shouted, pointing to a narrow side passage. The group squeezed through just as the main tunnel collapsed behind them, the sound of falling rock deafening. The side passage was narrow and uneven, forcing the group to move single file. Atlas led the way, his nose low to the ground as he sniffed out the safest path. Emma glanced back at the children, her chest tightening at the sight of their pale, frightened faces. "We're almost there," she reassured them, though she wasn't sure if it was true. The light. At last, a faint light appeared ahead. The group emerged onto the eastern ridge, gasping for air as they stumbled out of the tunnel. The cool night breeze was a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the sanctuary. "We made it," Maria said, her voice thick with relief. But Emma knew it wasn't over yet. She turned to Jack. "They'll come after us. We need to be ready." Jack nodded. "Let's get the kids to safety first, then we'll figure out our next move." Atlas stood at the edge of the ridge, his gaze fixed on the distant forest. Even in the moment of relief, he remained vigilant, ready for whatever came next. The group moved quickly down the ridge, the children's small feet stumbling over rocks and roots as the forest closed in around them. Atlas led the way, his movements deliberate and cautious. Emma stayed close to Caleb, her hand gripping his tightly to reassure him. "We need a place to hide," Maria said, her voice strained as she glanced over her shoulder. Clara nodded, pulling out her map. "There's an old ranger's cabin about half a mile from here. It's abandoned, but it'll give us cover." "Then that's where we're heading," Jack said firmly. The trek was grueling, but at last, the group reached the cabin. It was a small, weathered structure, its wooden walls warped with age. Jack tested the door, and it creaked open reluctantly. "Get inside," he said, ushering the children through. The group collapsed onto the cabin's dusty floor, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Maria immediately began tending to the children, checking for injuries, while Clara barricaded the door with a broken chair. Emma sat with her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around Caleb as he leaned against her. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. As the children drifted into an uneasy sleep, the adults gathered near the cabin's single window. Jack peered out into the darkness, his revolver resting on the windowsill. "They'll come after us," he said quietly. "Victor won't let us get away with this." "We bought ourselves some time," Clara said, her voice resolute. "But we need a plan before they regroup." Eli paced the room, his frustration evident. "We can't keep running. If we don't finish this now, they'll just come back stronger." Emma looked down at Atlas, who lay at her feet, his ears twitching. "He'll lead us again," she said softly. "He always knows where to go." Jack nodded. "Then we rest tonight. Tomorrow, we end this." The first light of dawn filtered through the cabin's warped shutters, casting long shadows across the floor. The group moved with quiet determination, gathering what little supplies they had left. "Exercise," Akira said, handing Clark. Clara spread out the map once more, marking their location and the sanctuary they had escaped from. "The Order's base stretches further than we thought," she said. "There's a secondary chamber here, near the river. If Victor's regrouping, that's where he'll be." "We go in fast," Jack said. "No distractions, no splitting up. We take out their operation and make sure they can't rebuild." He added. Emma glanced at Caleb, who was helping Maria pack medical supplies. "What about the kids?" she asked. "They stay here," Jack replied. "We'll leave Maria to protect them." Maria nodded. "I'll keep them safe. You focus on stopping Victor." The group followed Clara's map to the river, where they found another entrance to the Order's base. This one was less imposing than the sanctuary's main chamber, but the symbols etched into the stone walls confirmed they were in the right place. "This is it," Eli muttered, his grip tightening on his weapon. Atlas sniffed the air, his body tense as he growled softly. Emma crouched beside him, her hand on his fur. "What do you smell, boy?" she whispered. Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them shifted. A hidden trapdoor sprang open, and Emma and Jack barely managed to pull Clara back before she fell into the pit below. "They rigged the place," Jack said, his jaw tightening. "We have to be more careful." The group navigated the chamber carefully, avoiding more traps as they pressed deeper into the Order's lair. At last they reached a wide room where Victor stood, flanked by robed figures. He turned to greet them, his expression a mix of amusement and fury. "You just don't know when to quit," Victor said, his voice cold. "But this ends here." Jack raised his revolver. Victor laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Do you think killing me will stop the Order? We are eternal. Another will rise to take my place." Emma stepped forward, her voice steady. "You're wrong. Without you, they'll fall apart." Victor's smile faded. "You have no idea what you're up against," he spat. Atlas growled, stepping protectively in front of Emma. The tension in the room was palpable, every movement charged with the promise of violence. Victor signaled to his guards, and chaos erupted. Jack fired his revolver, taking down one of the robed figures while Eli swung his weapon with brutal efficiency. Clara ducked behind a pillar, using a flashlight to blind one of the attackers before Jack finished them off. Emma focused on Victor, who moved with surprising speed and precision. He grabbed a ceremonial blade from the altar, slashing at her with practiced ease. Atlas leaped at Victor, knocking him off balance and sending the blade clattering to the ground. Emma seized the opportunity, grabbing the blade and standing over Victor, her chest heaving. "You lose," she said, her voice unwavering. Victor stared up at Emma, his face twisted in fury and disbelief. "You think you've won?" he spat, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "The Order is more than me. It's an idea. A legacy. You can't kill that. Emma tightened her grip on the ceremonial blade, her hands trembling as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. Atlas stood at her side, his growl low and steady, ready to protect her at any cost. "This ends now," she said, her voice resolute. "No more children, no more fear." Victor sneered, his arrogance undeterred even in defeat. But before Emma could act, Jack stepped forward, his revolver aimed directly at Victor's chest. "Get the kids out of here," Jack said, his tone cold. "I'll make sure he doesn't follow." Emma hesitated, her gaze locking with Jack's. She saw the determination in his eyes, the resolve of a man who had lost too much and was willing to sacrifice everything to make things right. "Be careful," she said, lowering the blade. As Emma and the others retreated toward the exit, a deafening rumble shook the chamber. Victor let out a chilling laugh, his voice echoing through the cavern. "You'll all die here," he shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "This place will be your tomb." The walls began to crumble as hidden charges detonated, collapsing the chamber and sealing off passages. Emma grabbed Clara and Eli, urging them forward as Atlas barked furiously, guiding the group through the falling debris. "This way!" Clara shouted, pointing to a narrow tunnel. Emma turned back for a split second, her heart sinking as she saw Jack standing his ground, firing his revolver to keep Victor's guards at bay. "Jack, come on," she screamed. Jack glanced at her, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. "Get them out of here," he said. Before Emma could respond, the ceiling caved in, cutting off her view of Jack and sealing the chamber behind a wall of rubble. The tunnel twisted and turned, the air growing thinner with every step. Atlas led the way, his injured body moving with unwavering determination. The group stumbled forward, coughing from the dust and choking on the acrid scent of smoke. At last they emerged into the open air, collapsing onto the forest floor as the sanctuary crumbled behind them. The sound of the collapse was deafening, a final exclamation point to the chaos they had endured. Maria was waiting with the children at the cabin, her face lighting up with relief as she saw the group emerge from the woods. "You made it," she said, rushing to help them. "Oh!" Emma hugged Caleb tightly, her heart aching with both relief and sorrow. "We made it," she whispered. The next day, the group returned to the ruins of the sanctuary to ensure the Order's operation was truly destroyed. The entrance was buried beneath tons of rock, and there was no sign of Victor or his followers. As they stood at the edge of the rubble, Emma placed a hand on Atlas's head, the dog leaning into her touch. "We couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. She chuckled. Clara placed a small marker at the site, a simple wooden cross to honor Jack's sacrifice. "He gave everything to stop them," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "We'll make sure it wasn't in vain." Back at Willow Creek, the group worked tirelessly to ensure the children rescued from the Order were cared for and reunited with their families. Caleb stayed with Emma, who decided to officially adopt him. "You're safe now," Emma told him one evening as they sat on the porch. "We're a family." Caleb smiled, his eyes filled with hope for the first time in years. Atlas lay at their feet, his eyes scanning the horizon. Despite the peace that had returned to Willow Creek, Emma knew they had to remain vigilant. The Order's reach had been severed, but its shadow still lingered. Months later, a statue of Atlas was unveiled in the town square, a tribute to the dog's bravery and unwavering loyalty. It became a symbol of protection and resilience for the people of Willow Creek, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, courage and unity could prevail. As the town began to heal, Emma, Caleb, and Atlas found solace in their new life together. But they never forgot the sacrifices that had been made, or the battles still to come. The story ended not with a sense of finality, but with the knowledge that the fight for justice and hope was ongoing. Willow Creek was quiet in the days following the group's escape from the sanctuary. The townsfolk, though unaware of the full extent of the Eclipse Order's activities, felt a shift in the air, a sense that a dark chapter had come to an end. Emma sat on the front porch of her house, the cool morning breeze brushing against her face. Atlas lay beside her, his head resting on his paws, his bandages a reminder of the harrowing events they had endured. Caleb played nearby with Lila, their laughter breaking through the stillness. For the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself a moment of peace. Yet, the weight of everything they had lost, Jack's sacrifice, the children's trauma, lingered in her heart. The next day, the group gathered at Clara's house to discuss the future. The room was filled with a sense of cautious optimism, but the scars of their battle were evident. "We need to make sure they're really gone," Eli said, his tone serious. "Victor might be dead, but the Order has roots that go deeper than we thought." Clara nodded, spreading out her maps and notes. "I've been going through everything we recovered from the sanctuary. There's no sign of immediate activity, but that doesn't mean they won't try to rebuild." Maria leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Then we keep watching. If they resurface, we'll be ready." Emma glanced at Caleb, who sat quietly in the corner, his eyes distant. "We also need to help the children heal," she said. "They've been through so much. We can't let the Order's damage define their futures." The group agreed, vowing to support one another and the town as they worked to rebuild. One morning, though, everything changed. In the following weeks, Emma and Clara worked to establish a support network for the rescued children and their families. They partnered with local authorities and charities, ensuring resources were available to those in need. Caleb became a beacon of hope for the other children, his resilience inspiring them to find strength in their shared experiences. Emma, too, found solace in her growing bond with him, their relationship built on mutual understanding and trust. Atlas played a central role in their healing process, his calm and protective presence providing comfort to both the children and adults. The townsfolk began to refer to him as the Guardian of Willow Creek, a title that filled Emma with pride. One sunny afternoon, the group gathered at the ruins of the sanctuary to honor Jack's sacrifice. Clara had crafted a plaque in his memory, inscribed with the words, "For Jack Monroe, a true protector. Your courage saved us all." Emma placed the plaque near the entrance to the collapsed chamber, her eyes stinging with tears. "You didn't just save us," she said softly. "You gave us a chance to fight for something better." As the group stood in silence, Atlas let out a soft howl, as if bidding farewell to their fallen friend. Willow Creek began to change in the months following the destruction of the Eclipse Order's sanctuary. The sense of fear that had once gripped the town was replaced by cautious optimism. Families who had been torn apart by the Order's actions slowly started to rebuild their lives, and the community came together in ways Emma hadn't seen before. The rescued children were enrolled in local schools, where teachers and counselors worked tirelessly to help them overcome their trauma. Caleb thrived in this environment, his natural empathy making him a leader among his peers. He often spoke about Jack's bravery and Atlas' unwavering protection, inspiring others to find their own courage. Emma became an advocate for the town, working closely with Clara to ensure that Willow Creek remained vigilant against future threats. Together, they organized community meetings to educate residents about the dangers of secrecy and the importance of standing together. One evening, as Emma walked through the town square, she paused in front of the newly erected statue of Atlas. The bronze sculpture captured the dog's strong, protective stance, his gaze fixed forward, as if always on guard. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Atlas, Guardian of Willow Creek, a symbol of loyalty, courage, and hope." Emma smiled, her hand brushing the cool metal. "We wouldn't have made it without you," she whispered. As if in response, the real Atlas trotted up beside her, his tail wagging. Caleb followed close behind, carrying a notebook filled with sketches and notes. "Are you drawing again?" Emma asked, ruffling his hair. Caleb nodded, a shy smile spreading across his face. "I'm making a story about Jack, Atlas, and everyone who helped save us." Em's heart swelled with pride. "That's a story worth telling." The peace of Willow Creek was briefly interrupted when Emma received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing only 3 words. "This isn't over." Emma's hands tightened around the letter as a chill ran down her spine. She knew immediately who had sent it. Ida Gazard, Salt and Pepper, a missing girl. "Victor," she muttered under her breath. She shared the letter with Clara and Jack's old contacts in law enforcement. Though there was no immediate sign of Victor or his followers, the message served as a grim reminder that the Order's influence wasn't completely eradicated. "We'll stay vigilant," Clara said, her voice steady. "If they come back, we'll be ready." Emma nodded, her determination hardening. "We'll protect this town no matter what." The weeks turned into months, and life in Willow Creek began to settle into a new normal. Emma found herself growing closer to Caleb, their bond deepened by the trials they had faced together. She officially adopted him in a small ceremony attended by the entire town. "You're my family now," Emma told Caleb as she hugged him tightly. "Always," Caleb replied, his voice filled with emotion. Atlas barked, wagging his tail as if to seal the promise. The adoption ceremony marked a new chapter for Emma, Caleb, and Willow Creek as a whole. The town, once overshadowed by fear, now stood as a beacon of resilience. Families shared meals together more often, neighbors watched out for one another, and children played freely in the town square beneath the watchful eye of Atlas's statue. Caleb, now officially part of Emma's family, began to thrive in his new home. He decorated his room with drawings of their journey, Atlas battling Victor's guards, Jack standing tall, and the sanctuary's collapse. Though the images reminded him of darker times, they also symbolized triumph. Emma encouraged his creativity, often sitting beside him as he worked on his sketches. "You're capturing something important," she said one evening. "Your story will show others that they're not alone, that they can fight back too." Caleb smiled, his pencil pausing on the page. "Maybe one day people will read about Atlas and everyone else who helped us. Maybe they'll see that even the smallest person can make a difference." Despite the town's recovery, Emma couldn't shake the memory of Victor's chilling words and the letters she had received. While the immediate threat seemed to have passed, the possibility of the Order's return loomed over her thoughts. She met with Clara regularly, discussing ways to keep the town prepared. Together, they created a network of trusted allies who could act quickly if anything suspicious arose. Maria, Eli, and others who had fought alongside them became the core of this group, ready to defend Willow Creek at a moment's notice. "Victor underestimated us once," Clara said during one of their meetings. "If he or his followers come back, they'll find a town that won't back down." Emma nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We're stronger now. They'll never take that from us." Crandall. As the first snow of winter blanketed Willow Creek, Emma and Caleb sat by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa while Atlas dozed at their feet. The crackling of the fire filled the cozy room, a stark contrast to the chaos they had faced just months earlier. "Do you ever think about what happened?" Caleb asked, his voice soft. Her brow furrowed as she listened. "All the time," Emma admitted, her gaze distant. "But not because I'm scared. I think about how brave you were, how Jack gave everything for us, and how Atlas kept us safe." Caleb smiled, reaching down to pet Atlas's head. "He's the best guardian ever." Emma chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "Yes, he is." The moment was peaceful, but Emma knew their story wasn't truly over. The letter served as a reminder of the challenges that might lie ahead, but for now, they were safe and together. As the new year approached, the town gathered in the square to celebrate their resilience and honor the sacrifices made to protect their community. Clara read a speech recounting the bravery of those who had fought against the order, while Emma lit a lantern in Jack's memory. The lanterns floated into the night sky, their warm glow illuminating the faces of the townspeople. For Emma, the sight was a reminder of the strength that could be found in unity. As the crowd began to disperse, Caleb tugged on her hand. Emma turned to see Atlas standing tall at the edge of the square, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Though the dog's body showed the signs of age and battle, his spirit remained unbroken. Emma placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, her heart swelling with pride. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we'll face it together." Atlas barked, his tail wagging as if to say he agreed. The story of Willow Creek wasn't over, but for now, the town and its guardians stood ready for whatever lay ahead.